can share like everything that I have. So this is like a very small space of like I sleep in there and I hang out over here. My kitchen is right there, and then like this is the space that I have carved out to actually like write and draw in. So I have to be like pretty economical with my space, which is really difficult for me to do because I think I'm a pretty messy person, and like any surface just ends up like cluttered with a bunch of stuff. Like this is a dead battery. Like I don't know why this is here. But then I have all of this other stuff that's like, I don't know, like I keep like some nibs in here, and those are fun to play with. Like I have these bookmarks that I got in Oaxaca, which I feel like have so much personality. But basically anything I find that is like reminds me of any of my drawings, I end up keeping. So I made this. I was taking a ceramics class for a while. Actually, this character ended up turning into a story idea. Yeah. So I have like a lot of these things around. Oh, I found this at like Kinokuniya in New York. It's like a brush holder, but it's like so perfect. It's like I want to make drawings and books about things like this. I was making some ceramic pins for a while. So this is a security camera, and that one broke. I don't know, I have so much stuff in here. I also have, I don't know, like these, I found this, which is like a bunch of fossils in this rock. There's a place called Año Nuevo that's not too far from San Francisco where I live that you can find like fossils in the rocks there. I made that spoon. Made these like, I don't know, these are like a bunch of books I have and sketchbooks and like other things I find at thrift stores or have found at thrift stores, like this wrapping paper where I was like, oh, I need to make a book that has like these should be like the end pages for a sketchbook that I make. And I've made a bunch of my own sketchbooks too. I was like putting into bookbinding for a little bit. So like this is leather I got in Argentina that's kind of like inexplicably zebra print. And then I have some other ones that are like, I had access to, I was working this commercial bindery for a little bit at the library in Philly. And so I was really excited about making like books that looked like library books. And I had like K-Fai, Steele, and other Maria. So I like sewed this book together. Like, this is a really old sketchbook. Oh, this is a really fun game too. It's where you try to draw cartoon characters from memory. And I think that we did a really good job with these ETs. Yeah, just like, so I sewed like everything on here together, and then I've glued this thing in, and this is some Charlie Browns from memory, which are like really not that great. I think that's supposed to be, what's the name of his friend? It's not Lucy. Oh, maybe Peppermint Patty. Oh. I think that's supposed to be Peppermint Patty. This is a really old sketchbook. Like, but that's like, I mean, I feel like that kind of captures this, like the agony that is Charlie Brown, right? And some pretty messed up Snoopies. Anyway, we'll play this game later also. Yeah, I have so much stuff. And oh, this is kind of cool. And this is cool because this was like a childhood thing of mine. So my dad gave me like a dip pen when I was growing up, and I used to like write all of my journals using this dip pen with like this purple ink, and this is the box that it came in. And now I store like a bunch of like these markers in here, and I would say most of the stuff that I use, this is like my really advanced labeling system, so I don't forget where things go. But let's see, brushes and big tools. I would say that this is like the first tool I take out when I'm working on something, and this is my my watercolor, like where I keep most of my watercolors. And it's pretty messy. And what I really like about using watercolor is that I'm really cheap. And I like that you can re-wet it and use it all, like multiple times. I'm like the kind of person that'll squeeze every bit out of a toothpaste tube. And I will like use every inch of a piece of paper. These ones are kind of cool too, because I took a workshop where I made all of these watercolors, and which sounds a lot more advanced than what it was, which was kind of like glorified like mixing. So you have like these pigments that are these raw pigments that are like different colors, and then you mix them with like gum arabic and honey and water and a couple of other things, and then you use like I'm forgetting what it's called, but it's kind of like a brayer. What is it called? Yeah, it's kind of like a pestle, but it's flatter and it's glass, and you use that to like grind it all up, and then it just becomes this sort of like liquid, and it's very like high pigmented. It's like the purest. Like one thing I'm trying to figure out as because I'm always playing with like, I don't know, different mediums, but generally watercolor is when I watercolor on top of ink, I found that it kind of like, do you see how that's doing that? It like kind of covers up like the ink. So what I usually do is I'll watercolor first and then ink on top of it. So this is just for like the sake of you seeing what these other pigs look like. Anyway, yeah, this is this thing right here. This is the workhorse that I mentioned before. Okay, so I can tell you a little bit about what brought Pip to life for me is, I always knew I grew up in like a pretty white town, or it's pretty like, not white. It happened to be white, but it was very like non-diverse, and like very dominant like white. So that was in Massachusetts. And pretty recently I looked up some census data from my town growing up, and there were about 10,000 people in the town in 1990, which is when I was a kid. And I was looking at the data, and of those people, like 4 of them were self-identified as Chinese. And I was looking at that and I was like, oh man, that was me, my brother, my mom, and my other brother. There were 4 other Chinese, and I don't even really identify so much with being a Chinese person because my dad is not Chinese, so I consider myself to be multiracial. And when I was growing up too, because I have like a really unusual name and I have a last name that's like very obviously a Chinese last name, I think a lot of people didn't really know how to read me. So I wanted to make a story that kind of addressed this idea of me growing up and not feeling like I really fit in the community that I grew up in, and not fitting in a community usually feels like I ended up like assimilating a lot to like the white culture that was around me. So for a long time, I think I just like identified more with white culture than other kinds of cultures. And as I got older, I was like, but I've never really felt that same way. It's like when substitute teachers would mess up my name or I would get made fun of. But so I had all of these different ways as a kid of coping with these very complex issues. And it was like issues that my parents wouldn't talk to me about. And my brothers wouldn't even talk about it. And even now when I bring it up to my brothers, it's just like a very like thorny issue. So I wanted to make this book that kind of like addressed what this idea of being normal was. And for me, like being normal was like, I felt very normal myself, but it was also having to deal with and understand like a lot of microaggressions that I was experiencing like as a kid, like people being like, hey, your name is so ethnic, or like, what is your name? What, like, where does your name come from? As a way of asking me, or like, are you like, where are you from? No, like, where are you from? As opposed to like, other friends that I would have who would not get that question a lot. So it's like learning as a kid, like learning how to like deal with that stuff and live what you think is like a pretty like normal life. And kind of, I guess, come to terms with like being like, there's no such thing as normal. Actually, normal is like a pretty whack idea anyway. So, yeah, I wanted to make a book about a character who explores and identifies, I can be exactly who I am, and I know that I'm different, and I'm really happy with my own differences.
Watch with me.
Yeah, I feel like this is like something like thinking a lot about race, especially in children's books, and like talking to other people about race in children's books. It's just something that like, I don't know, it's really an amazing conversation that's happening right now. And I feel like it's like just really, it's like I read other people who are writing stuff or thinking about stuff, and I start like hyperventilating because I get so excited. I'm like, finally, like this is like a conversation I've been wanting to have for so long. And it's like starting to understand all of these like implications of things like who's making books and who are the books being made for, and like whose story gets to get told and whose story like usually gets left out. And I think a lot about like, I don't know, just like the ability, like who has the time to make and write stories. And I've met so many people who have like so many like great stories in them or have such great lives that they've lived. And they're like, yeah, I've always wanted to write a children's book. And my response to them is like, yeah, you should write a children's book. You have a really great story to tell. I feel like the more you can encourage people to tell stories and draw. So like for example, like even playing like the gross baby game, getting people drawing or thinking about stories or thinking about narrative, there's a lot of joy that comes in that. And I think, you know, it's like also like a lot of like hard stories come out of it, like, you know, like this big, but yeah, encouraging people to tell their story. And I love that that's becoming a part of like the conversation in Kid Lit right now is like you have like a very legitimate story to tell, and that's a story that should be told. And I love also like trying to get kids to be authors of their own stories and share their own stories about their own families, and yeah, spin those into narratives too.